National Statistics Day. I have been in the Reserve Bank for long years, and I have always taken pride in Indian statistics. In my international visits that I have done at Harvard, Stanford, and the IMF, I have always held on to this opinion that Indian statistics is amongst the best you can ask for in an emerging country. Statistics is extremely expensive. Statisticians are extremely rare and expensive. Despite that fact, we in India have had one of the best statistics one can ask for in the limited resources that we have. So when the National Statistics Day gave us an opportunity, we wanted to celebrate it by inviting one of the most sorry, one of the most well-known statisticians of our country. I would now like to hand over the session to Dr. Ashok Vishandas to chair the session and introduce our speaker for the day, Dr. Ashok Vishandas.
Thank you. Thank you, Charan Singh, for introducing, and let me have the unique privilege of introducing our chief guest, Pranav Sen. He had been the first chief statistician of India, first principal advisor in the Planning Commission, and he had adored the position of National Statistical Commission, which is of the rank of the Minister of the State in Government of India. He had a bachelor degree in economics from St. Stephen. He did his MA thereafter and the PhD from John Hopkins. And he has been the author of many 5-year plans also. So those are the few things in his cap. He has many more distinction to his credit. He has many other things, but to cut the story short, today he has kindly agreed to very, very pious day, that is National Statistics Day. And let me also add, this statistics is the only subject on this planet on which the government of India gives the celebrates and observes the national day. There are many other national days, which government recognizes, but the discipline-wise, this is the only subject, and that gives me a lot of pride in the subject. And this had been my, first love of statistics, so it's very dear to me. And many people talk about many things about statistics, but let me tell, we have studied in particular when I was in the system of many statistical system of many countries, but India's statistical system stands very unique and one of the best in the world. And why today we have chosen this subject is because it is the day on which great father of the, I must say, father of Indian statistical system, Shri Mahalanobis, Prashant Chandra Mahalanobis, was born as a mark of his respect to his birthday, and he had been a pioneer. He is known for the Mahalanobis distance and many other discovery. He had been associated with the Planning Commission, Mahalanobis model, and many other things. And he had been the fellow of Royal Society, Padam Vibhushan, and many other things he had been adored with. So today's subject is, and before this, I am today reminded of statistics is well understood by the statistician, but it is not so well understood by many others. Let me quote on the lighter vein, and then I will hand over the platform to Pranav Sen. There is a small joke on statistics. There was a big drought in USA, in UK in 1920s, and it was being reviewed. What is the impact of the drought in that country? So the cabinet secretary of that country was reviewing with the prime minister of that country, and Prime Minister Humphrey, what is the position of the impact of the drought? He said, sir, things are under control. only 5.6 people are dying every day. He said, how come 5.6 people die? It has to be either 5 or 6. Then he replied, he was equally ignorant about statistics. He said, sir, you are right. When I say 5.6 are dying, people are dying, I mean 5 people have died and 6 are about to die. So that is, in short, how many people misunderstand the statistics, and I'm sure Pranab Sen will talk about the data during disasters. Two Indian statistical Indian statistician meet the requirement. I think this is prolific subject and it will generate a lot of interest. And he's definitely going to tell us many more things which are not heard. And I'm sure every one of us is waiting with the great eagerness to listen to Pranab Sen. So I hand over the baton to Pranab Sen. Kindly, the floor is yours. So please proceed on this.
Thank you, Charan. Thank you, Ashok. It's a privilege to be here with EGROW on Statistics Day. Professor Mahalanobis, as Ashok put it, is really the founder of the Indian statistical system. And I've had the privilege of knowing him very closely. He and my father were colleagues in the Planning Commission. So I've known him since childhood. And it's always a matter of pride to be able to contribute in some small way to his memory. And that's the spirit in which I would like you to take this talk, because some of this talk will be critical, but that's, I think, how Professor Mahalanobis would have wanted it. He liked criticism. The title of today's talk is Data During Disasters. Now that's a very large topic, frankly. But I'll try and boil it down into bite-sized pieces. So let's first talk a little bit about disasters and the role of data in both assessing and managing disasters. Now, what has happened, of course, is that we never really talked about the role of statistics in disaster and disaster management, really until now, until COVID hit and became a pan-national phenomenon. We've had disasters all the time. Now, whether you call them disasters or you call them crises, but one form of disaster or the other has been around for a long, long time, forever, for that matter. But we never really talked about statistics and the role that statistics was playing. Today, it has become the cynosure of a lot of people. And a lot of the talk that we are seeing is very critical. And there's a certain amount of justice to that criticism, and I will come to that. The criticism essentially at the moment says that the data is so far behind times that it's functionally useless for taking policy measures here and now. And that's, I think, something that needs to be addressed. But, this is a very special kind of disaster. As I said, we've had disasters earlier, and disasters come in various forms and of various dimensions with very different geographical implications. And the data needs for each of them will necessarily be different. So one has to be very careful about what one means by data under these kinds of conditions. So think of a localized disaster, say an earthquake. statistical systems are not geared towards measuring the local impact of a disaster of that kind. Even if the area is wider, so let's say the state, some of the data would be appropriate, the statistical system generates, and some of it will not. By and large, our data systems are geared towards disasters which have a much larger geographical impact. The national, of course, being the most obvious. This is a case of a particular disaster where the ramifications are national, the effects are national. But what we have also seen is something interesting, and this is really, which brings me to the topic of my discussion. It's what COVID has done is to really bring out very starkly the problem of a particular shock in one location having very strong effects, and it goes beyond ripple effects on other locations. So if you think about what happened during COVID, other than the period where there was a national lockdown and therefore the shock was a national one, and that was only for 2 months during April and May of last year. But since then up to now, we've had localized lockdowns happening all over the country at various points in time. And we are very hard pressed to understand what kind of knock-on effects these measures are having on the country. Then there's, of course, the other story regarding the migrants. So all of a sudden, you had this huge outflow of migrants from the urban areas back to rural areas. Then you had a lot of them coming back. We were unable to track the first, we were unable to track the second, and then third, they went back again. And we've really not been able to get a grip on this with any degree of precision. So where does that leave us as statisticians, particularly as official statisticians? So let's go back to the issue of disasters. If you think about most disasters, which by their very nature tend to be more localized, the most widespread would be droughts and perhaps some floods. These are the two most common disasters which are widespread. These are also present very different characteristics. And I think we need to talk about these characteristics when we talk about data. In the case of droughts, access to the geography is not a problem. In the case of floods, on the other hand, access to the geography may be a serious constraint. So you clearly cannot have a system which operates seamlessly in both kinds of scenarios. So what do we do? Well, let's then talk about our statistical system a bit, and then perhaps it will give you a feel for what I'm saying. First of all, if you talk with anybody, and I see a lot of statisticians in the audience, and if you ask any of us, what is the Indian statistical system really built on? And the answer is it's essentially built on three pillars. The first pillar is reporting systems, registration and reporting systems that are mandated by law, through which data has to be provided, which are then taken and appropriately compiled. The second is other administrative data systems. And the third is for variables which are not amenable to collection through any of these two methods, it's surveys. This is fairly typical of most countries. But if you look at the way our discourse works, there is far greater importance given to surveys than in most other countries. And I think we need to understand why, and why Professor Mahanobis put so much emphasis on surveys, so that you actually almost built up a system based on surveys. The main reason is the nature of the Indian economic system. In the Indian economy, the formal sector is so small that filing of returns and registration data will capture just a tiny fraction of the economy. It has grown now in size if you're looking at measures like GDP, but it has almost not grown at all if you're looking at measures like employment. Now, because of that, now if you think about developed countries with whom we compare ourselves, in most of those countries, the bulk of the data actually comes from returns. In our country, a fairly small fraction does. Now, in a situation like that, you are really then left with the other two devices, which is surveys and administrative data. Now, when I say administrative data, I am using it in a very specific sense. And that specific sense is that this is data collected by various government agencies in the process of implementing government schemes. And this volume of data is enormous. I mean, if anybody wishes to talk about large data, possibly one of the largest data set is administrative data that is collected in it. The problem, of course, is that we are very hesitant to use that data. There's a huge amount of data, but there's a great deal of hesitancy in using it in any shape or form. Now, this arises essentially out of a deep distrust of most forms of administrative data. And the reason for that is quite strong. It is that most of this data is collected as a part of the monitoring and evaluation that is carried out by ministries when they implement a particular program. And because it is used for monitoring, there is an incentive problem with those who are charged with collecting this information, who are usually also charged with implementing that program. So you have a basic conflict of interest going on, since you don't have a parallel information collection system. The data is likely to be quite seriously compromised. Now, if you talk with anybody in any ministry, and talk with any of the joint secretaries who are implementing the government programs large-scale government programs in particular, they will uniformly tell you, yes, we've got a lot of data, but we don't trust it. There are conflicts of interest problems, and we don't trust them. Now, if the custodians of the data don't trust it, then an outside agency like the statistical system is not going to be very comfortable using that data. And I think this is a trap we've fallen into, and it's something which I really would like to focus on. Now think of what happens during a disaster. The disaster for any given geographical area is a disruptive influence which happens usually over a fairly short period of time and requires a response within a fairly short period of time. You cannot wait for a year and a half for a survey to be conducted before you start taking measures. The question is, where will that data come from? Now, if you think about it, for the statistical system to be able to gear itself up, to be able to collect relatively disaggregated data, because you do need it at a level of granularity that we would normally not go into, would take a long period of time. By the time the crisis would be over. So you have to rely upon the administrative structures which are permanently located in that location. There is no other choice. The question then is, how do we think about it? Can we actually use that information? And if so, if we can use it during disasters, why can we not use it under normal circumstances? This takes me back to, in a sense, the origins of our official statistical system. If you actually look at the statistical products that are produced in this country, what you will find is that they have been driven essentially by two dominant needs. The first is the need to produce national accounts. And the second was the need to provide the information so that the national 5-year plan models could be operationalized. These were the two major driving forces behind the development of the official statistical system. Now, if you think about these two as being the principal uses, there can be, of course, a whole variety of subsidiary uses that the data can be put to, and I will come to that later. But if these are the two main requirements, and you think about it, both of them share one characteristic, which is both of them require level estimates. You should be able to measure absolute values. All right? Because of that characteristic, the Indian statistical system has essentially been geared towards producing level estimates for the most part. Yes, some change estimates are given, but those I will come to in a little while. But by and large, the focus is on level estimates. That's the way we feel. As a result of that, there has been very strong resistance in the official system to having panel data. Now, this is a little odd. In fact, if you talk with most of our statistical friends here, they will tell you that really the breakthrough comes with the periodic labor force survey, which is now being treated as the first real, although still a rotational panel, but still a panel. And it's the first of its kind. But that's not true. For every index, we've been using panels. The IIP is a panel. The CPI is a panel. The WPI is a panel. Every index by its fundamental nature requires panel. So we've been doing panels for donkey's years. But there still seems to be a mindset problem. That in some sense, panels will not give us the data we need. But during a disaster, what is the data that you want? You don't want level estimates. You don't care. What you need to know is the amount of damage that has happened. You're trying to measure change. You don't really care what the level is. And panels are uniquely suited to that kind of a data requirement. Now, if what I'm saying is correct, then we need to reflect or rethink the administrative data conundrum. I think everybody agrees administrative data has built into it an incentive incompatibility problem. There is a conflict of interest. We all accept that. The question is, are they or are they not reasonably good measures of change? Because administrative data sets typically, by the way our administrative system works and thinks, administrative data sets are almost always panels. The problem is we haven't thought about it that. What we've been thinking about is, can we use administrative data as a substitute for survey data? And the answer is a clear, unequivocal no, you cannot. But the point is that can we use administrative data as a supplementation? And the answer is yes. The problem, of course, is we've never actually, that is, high quality professional statisticians have not actually looked at the administrative data sets that exist in every ministry and government of India, in every department, in every state government, in every district headquarters, in the collector's office. We have not looked at it in that particular light. And we should do so. Because the chances are that if we do it, if we do not treat administrative data as a substitute for any other form of data, then it may actually give rise to a way of thinking which is more integrative than the way we have been thinking about it up to now. So this is our problem. It's a problem in our minds. And it can be changed. And I think disasters are a good time to change it. And this is something that we really need to work upon. We really need to think about very, very seriously. Okay? Which brings me to my last, which is that generating data for data's sake or statistics for statistics' sake does not happen. Statistics are generated in order to meet a demand, and that demand has to be articulated. The point is, professional statisticians have to be given very clear idea as to what the data shall be used for. Unfortunately, for the kind of information that we need during crises and disasters, such articulation has simply not happened. It just has not. Now, if it doesn't happen, then the statistician cannot actually place himself or herself in the mind of the potential user. So when we are talking about data for disasters, I think the right question that should be asked is, all of you who are criticizing the Indian statistical system, would you please tell us what data you want and how, for what reason? If you are unable to articulate, then no statistical system will be able to provide that information. Statisticians are not mind readers. So this articulation has to come. And in all the discussions that I have seen so far, I have complete sympathy with the view that the statistical system is not giving us the information that we need to manage this pandemic. But then when you ask the question, what data would you like? You don't get an answer. The point is that answer has to come from the users. That answer has to come from the people who have the domain knowledge. If they are not being able to articulate it clearly enough, it is too much to expect the statistical system to preempt them and come up with solutions. So we should actually use this particular opportunity that we have now to force this dialogue. And we must also use this opportunity to force many of the ministries of Government of India to disgorge the data that they're sitting on and which they don't release. The problem, of course, is we are more than a year into the pandemic, and I have not heard this particular discussion as yet. I hope that today, on National Statistics Day, we will collectively resolve to begin this dialogue and do it more. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pranav Sen. It was a masterful exposition. You touched so many tangents which are very relevant, and I agree with each one of each word you have spoken on this. Absolutely mind-boggling. Now, before we open the floor for questions, I have one question. You had touched on this particular subject. Basically, implicitly you have touched on the four ingredients of the good data set. That is the adequacy, credibility or reliability of the data, transparency, and timeliness. I think these are the four important ingredients of data which you touched. But what do you think out of these four ingredients we are lacking the most, and therefore it does not command that much respect which it ought to command the respect? You very well said, even the administrative ministry who are the custodian of data, they also have some issues on the reliability or credibility of the data. So what are your thoughts on these, because these are the important tangents of the good data set.
No, Ashok, the thing is that the real complaint about Indian data has been the issue of timeliness, saying that it's slow. We do things too infrequently. Okay, what we produce is very high quality, but we don't produce it with sufficient frequency, and the time lag is too long. So it's really the timeliness issue which has been the main complaint. But if you start using administrative data much more aggressively, you are going to start getting a lot of criticism about the accuracy and transparency of the data as well. At the moment, we don't have that problem because we don't do it. Which is why there has to be an education, because see, most lay observers, and by lay observers, I'm not talking about the man on the street. I'm talking about professional economists. Charan, Arvind isn't here. Arvind, even professional economists are so used to thinking about statistical data as giving accurate measures of levels, that the importance of change and the direction of change, that those can be very accurate without giving you a level estimate. That simply has not been articulated. So what's going to end up happening is you start using administrative data and all sorts of fellows are going to get on your case and say that, the quality of the data is poor, which is a charge we really haven't had to face up to now.
Thank you. Very, very good answer to this. Now we invite the question from the participants, and kindly introduce briefly yourself and the question directly, so that we to the Professor Pranav Sen. Charan, we can open the floor for questions.
Sure, we can. There is in the chat box, there's a question from Anne-Marie Chaku. Maybe Anne-Marie Chaku should ask and explain the question. But if others, sure, raise your hand, I or Dr. Ashok can then point out and you can ask the question.
Very good evening, sirs. Myself, Anne-Marie Chaku. I'm a doctor. I recently awarded my doctorate from Central University of Karnataka. My question is that unfortunately we don't have any population census data for this year, but and the available data is almost a decade old. So how can we access a reliable recent data for this?
Well, you see, this is why I prefaced my remarks by saying that COVID, this pandemic, is a very unusual disaster. Because what has essentially happened is that the normal data collection methodology that we follow has simply broken down. And that is what is forcing us to think about alternatives. That we cannot be held hostage to a situation where the normal data collection methods simply are not working because of the nature of the pandemic or the nature of the disaster. As I said, this will be a problem in an extensive flood situation also. You will simply not be able to access. Which is why we have to look for data sources which are localized and try and see what is the kind of use we can make out of it. If you think that that data is going to give you the equivalent of, let's say, the annual survey of industry, it's not going to happen. The point is, will that data give you sufficient information to take decisions on? It will not give you sufficient information to do an academic paper where you need continuity in the data. But disasters by their nature represent discontinuities, and we have to treat those as discontinuities.
Hello, sir.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Yeah, your voice is very faint. You have to speak louder.
Yes.
Hello. Are you getting me, sir?
Yes, Dr. Nath, I'm getting you, but you're, still not very clear.
I mean,
No, I think there's a problem with the connection.
question there. Yeah, network
Is it okay now?
now it's okay or not, sir? Hello.
Is it okay?
No, it's not clear at all.
Okay, sir. Sorry,
Voice is
sorry,
faint,
network.
Dr. Nath.
Hello.
Okay,
Hello.
okay. Network is.
Is it okay?
Yes.
Dr. Nath, I have a suggestion for you. Just write it in the chat box and
Yeah.
I'll read it aloud. I will read
Sure,
it
sure.
aloud, so we'll have
Okay.
Dr. Sain's view on it. Yeah.
Okay.
Good evening, sir. Am I audible? My name is coming as admin. I have not joined as an admin. This is Rakesh
Okay.
Srivastava from Baroda.
Okay, please go ahead, Mr. Srivastava.
Okay, very good evening, sir. And I'm very lucky to attend this lecture. Sir, I met you 10 years back in NASA when you came for the lecture and we were there for the training program.
Oh, how wonderful.
I hope Dr. Sain, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, yes,
Yes,
clearly.
yes.
Sir, my question is a little bit academic, but what we are facing right now is connected to the previous question. Sir, the survey methodology and the data collection right now, what actually we are doing for our MSc projects, that we are collecting the data through the Google form, right? And we are sending it through the WhatsApp groups or our known groups, whatever. So the question which we are facing is that if we are collecting the data through the Google form, is it random? Can we treat it as a random sample?
Probably not.
Oh, yes.
There's a host of problems associated with that.
Right, sir. Right, sir. Then comes my next question. If it is not, then what?
Answer this because this actually covers a lot of area. We'll come to your
Yes,
next
sir.
question after I finish. Okay.
Sure,
The first
sure,
of
sir.
all is that Google Forms itself is
Yes,
going
sir.
to lead to a very, very strong self-selection bias.
Exactly, sir.
It's exceedingly complex.
Very
Number
true.
one. Number two, now this is a problem that you have with any kind of non-face-to-face data collection, which
Yes, sir.
is that unless a relationship has already been developed between the interviewer and the interviewee, you're liable to get poor quality responses. Now, that may not be a bias, but the quality of the data is going to be extremely poor. And this is something one has seen in telephone surveys. It happens all the time. And by and large, the methodology that most places use is that the first visit is always a face-to-face visit, where you establish a rapport, you establish an understanding of what the data is being collected for, you get the person's cooperation. It's almost a social event. Only then do you go to the online mode. If you start with the online mode, you're probably going to get pretty bad quality data.
But Professor Sain, as we are discussing that data collection in pandemic, and as you know that we cannot go for what you call as a primary data collection, our
Sure.
students cannot go, we cannot go. So what we are resorting that web survey methodology, something like that. So sir, in that sir, honorable sir, in that web survey methodology, what we are facing the problem is that as a hardcore or maybe theoretical statistician, I should not say hardcore, theoretical statistician, sir, first question which we are discussing is whether the sample collected is a random sample, number one. If it is not, is it a purposive sampling or is it something like, I mean, as you said very rightly, that you are selecting units through your own known connections and all those things. So, will the statistical inference or the hardcore statistical tools and techniques will be applicable to such type of data? Say, can we apply principal component analysis? say I'm doing a project on the positive impact of COVID-19 in Gujarat state, and we are trying to identify something like that for MSc level, sir. It's a very small study at the
No,
academic level.
see, for the academic level, see, the problem is of what level of generalization you're going to move to in
There
terms
you
of
are.
in terms of the analysis. If the level
Exactly.
of generalization is not high, if you
Yeah.
recognize that there is an inherent sampling bias,
Yes, sir.
you are fine, right? All I'm suggesting is you need to be careful
Yeah.
about non-sampling errors creeping in
True. True, sir.
because of the survey methodology that you're using. And I would
Yes.
suggest if you're going to do this, uh, you shouldn't do it just once. You should talk with the same person at least once.
Oh, great.
Okay,
Great, sir.
so that what you are doing is a certain amount of cross-validation of the
True.
data that you've already collected.
Thank you very much, sir. I am delighted. There are many participants. I know there may be many questions, but thanks for your very learned guidance, sir. And if possible, I'll try to connect you again. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks once
Thank you.
again.
Now we have Dr. Pavitra Kumar, then Dr. Rajiv Mehta. We see the hands. Yes, go on, Dr. Pavitra.
Good evening, Professor Sen. So I have I have 2-3 doubts, sir. Sir, there is a actual debate going on that discrepancy between like CMI data and EPW data and government data, sir. So so how to see these things actually? So as a researcher, sometimes also I use CMI and data and EPW data. So according to you, which data is correct? I'm confused. That is the first question. The second question is during the first wave of like pandemics, when the migration started, so there was a lot of debate in that government don't have that migration data from one like city to another city, how much migration is there. So and actually also that migration data is not available. So should the government build a like a statistic of migration data, or if government don't have data, how can government talk about like I have done like package for migration, something like that? So if you throw some light, then I'll be obliged.
No, Pavitra, you're absolutely correct. And if I'm not mistaken, in the chat box, there was a question that somebody asked, I forget who. Maybe I can check it, but doesn't matter. You know, that it sort of ties in with what you're saying, is that in the absence of the 21 census, and that's not going to happen till next year, maybe even later, we do have a frame problem, a sampling frame problem. Okay, but in a sense, it's tied with what you're saying. But think of what the nature of the solutions is. If this kind of disruption happens, there, what you do need is maybe not the same level of accuracy, but you do need devices through which you can actually update the frames that you have. All right. And one of the things, now I don't understand why the RGI's office doesn't do this. But if you have sentinel sites which are properly chosen and properly distributed around the country, you can do a fair amount of updation of your frame and therefore your sample. All right. The point is we don't do it. But this is something we need to think about. The SRS is our sentinel sites. And the SRS does as good a job, if not a better job, than the civil registration system.
Yes.
But that's the only one. It's in the RBI's office. The RBI should have been thinking about how do I actually leverage that. But much more importantly, the medical profession, they use sentinel sites much more aggressively than we statisticians. So a lot of epidemiological data really comes from sentinel sites. The entire HIV/AIDS program was driven by sentinel sites. All right. Now, sentinel sites have the advantage that they are local. They are manned locally. And that's the kind of thing. But as I said, in a lot of cases, administrative data and the physical presence of administrators will give you a lot of this information if you treat it properly.
Thank you.
Now, Dr. Rajiv Mehta, he raised the hand.
Thank you very much, my colleagues from EGROW. I am Rajiv Mehta, continuing with FAO Saudi Arabia as a senior statistician. I'm very happy to be listening to Dr. Pranav Sen after a long, long time. We had a long evening.
Hi, Rajiv.
Good. And my compliments to all the colleagues on the National Statistics Day as well. In fact, you have provoked a lot of thoughts, and it's a good that data for disaster is a very important topic. I put it because we have focused our discussion mainly on the official statistics, which is basically a historical data, and more or less it becomes a static data. So this static data has got some value, okay, but then we should not forget that there is a lot of advancement has taken place on a dynamic data, real-time data that comes from, especially the meteorological data, which is coming for tracking the cyclones, tracking the floods, and tracking the drought. This is a very dynamic data. And if we have seen in the recent years, we had advanced technologies where we have used this advanced data for the benefit of the society and benefit of the people. We, in fact, recent cyclone, we have earned a big reputation globally for managing the disaster with a very advanced data, which is a real-time data. So this is one part that we have got advanced some technologies of the data, which is used for the decision making and for coping the disaster. And the static data, especially, I put it in three categories: demographic, assets and resources, and thirdly, the economic activity. All three things, they get impacted on other thing. So this quality of data is very important. But first, I will make a distinction of these two things. And just a small thing I will just add there. When we see the disasters, we have got some disasters which are already predictable. Like, for example, the drought is there. It can be predicted. A cyclone is there. A disaster which cannot be predicted is an earthquake. And very difficult to have some data to have advanced knowledge of earthquake, but the impact assessment is there. I got an opportunity of tracking the COVID globally as well as from the FAO point of view, especially from the point of view of the food security and other issues. The demographic issues are already there, but then COVID was very initial, if we say in the first phase when it was there in the March, April, May, and I got stuck in Saudi Arabia at that time and tracking this thing closely. This was where uncertainty was there that how it is going to happen, what is going to be the health impact, what are the consequences, even the migration problem that came. It was a very unexpected migration of the labor. So we never knew what is going to be the disaster impact and what kind of data is required. So COVID was a very different situation. So depending upon the disasters, some disasters possibly have got a better preparedness, and some disasters are very unique and preparedness is not there. So this is basically, it's a very important topic, but then it will vary from disaster to disaster and the kind of data required for decision support. So thank you. This is what I thought of sharing my views.
No, I quite agree, Rajiv, but let me make just one point very clear, which is, yes, there are a lot of technologies. And if you recall, some time back, there was a lot of excitement and about the nightlight data that you're getting from satellites. And there was a whole raft of papers which came out on using nightlight data to estimate changes in GDP. Okay. Fortunately, that rubbish has now died a quiet death, right? But it has been replaced. Now, the new sort of sex symbol in high-frequency statistics is Google mobility data. And the mobility data is, everybody is talking about mobility data. I think once we actually get the true data and we start actually analyzing the relationship, it's going to be just as much rubbish as the nightline was. So technology gives you data. The point is, Raju, I keep saying, all data is good. The problem is if you misuse it. Nightlight data is excellent as nightlight data. The question is that can you use it as a substitute for GDP? Right?
No, definitely. Each data has got its own specific utility.
Similarly with mobility data.
Yeah.
Now, we are going to get into a situation where in the future, where work from, 30% of the workforce will be doing work from home, your mobility will show you GDP has fallen. So we need to be careful about what use you put that data to.
Naturally.
How you
Sure.
think about it.
Thank you very much. Nice to be there with you.
Right. And there is a question from Dr. Dilip Nath, who has been waiting for quite a while because his voice is not clear. So I will read his question.
Yes, of course.
In northern part of India, there is a big problem of professional statistician for which the researcher and academician face the problem of the actual representation of the data. The collected data cannot be presented in a paper manner. Only a few institutes are encouraging statistics. How to migrate the problem are to popularize statistics for this region particular. So that is the question by Dr. Nath.
Dr. Nath, my sympathies are with you, but the fact is that the statistics as a discipline hasn't been popularized enough across the country. It's not just the Northeast, right? So if you look at Delhi University has more than 100 colleges, and there are only 6 of them which have a statistics program. Okay, so this is not unique to you. The problem is that the experience that we are finding now is that the value of statisticians has been recognized by industry much more so than either the students themselves realize it or certainly the educational system realizes it. The net result today, and this has been going on for at least 15, 20 years, that when you go to any master's program in statistics anywhere in the country, there will be just a handful of boys or girls whose bachelor's is in statistics. Because children who are doing their undergraduate in statistics are getting recruited at the undergraduate level. So most of the MStat people are in fact mathematics background, not statistics background. Statistics background guys are all working in financial companies.
Exactly.
Yeah, next question by Saji George. Saji George, would you like to ask yourself or I should read for you? Because that
Yes, sir.
question
Good
is...
evening, sir.
Yes.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, sir. Sir, I just want to raise this doubt about I'm a researcher. So, sir, what is the range of this data during disasters? Because apart from the disaster issue and finding solutions to such problem outside the abnormal times, what is the relevance of disaster data? Because other data, let us, if we consider the economic data on economic activities or economic behavior, it is spanning across the time, regardless of the abnormal times or normal times. So abnormal times data may not be fitting to it, right? So how do we manage the data during the abnormal times? I mean, so how do we accommodate those times wherein we have abnormal data to maintain the continuity of the data frame?
No, the reason you have to include abnormal data, all systems are learning systems, and abnormal times give you lessons, which we must remember. The point is, an earthquake happens, and it gives rise to a whole range of things which you measure, and then you say, but unless an earthquake happens, this data is useless to me. It's not true, because the changes that are created by a disaster can actually have lasting effects. And so if you think about it in terms of doing an econometric exercise, a disaster can well be a point of discontinuity, right? So the belief that disasters themselves are one-off affairs and they just vanish is wrong. More often than not, every disaster will lead to serious changes in income distributions in that particular geography, which will then lead to further consequences in that area, if for no other reason. So to
then we are
forget
living.
about the data that you're collecting during disaster would be absolutely wrong. You are then not doing the learning that you're doing.
Sir, I just have a doubt about that. Sir, then the data will be of different regimes, right? Then how can we accommodate?
Look, we always live with different regimes. The point is that each shock is a learning experience of its own. And we accumulate that knowledge through series of shocks. If you think about the global economic crisis in 2008, right? Why were we able to cope with it so successfully? Because we had already learned from the Asian crisis. So each crisis is an opportunity to learn, because the belief that this is never going to happen again is simply wrong.
So thank you,
very much,
Charan.
sir. Thank you very
I
much,
know
sir.
time is not on our side. Can we ask the last question before we wind up, Charan?
Yes, please, the last question, because
Yes.
we get too many complaints that we do not stick to the time.
Yeah. So one last question by Sejal. Sejal, would you like to ask yourself? Sejal Babel? There is a question posted on the chat box.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you.
Please carry on. And this is the last question.
Yeah. Thank you for the honor, sir. The session was really good. My question to you is about the level of misreporting, underreporting, and manipulation of data, apart from the discrepancies of collection of data. So the reporting also has a lot of discrepancies. That damages the credibility and also creates a lot of confusion among people who actually are consumers of such data. We've seen this with COVID reporting, unemployment figures, and a lot more things. And obviously, basing policy decisions on such manipulated data can also be very damaging and it could go wrong. So, like, how is it that we can address this issue and we can ensure that data reporting is also as credible as, like, we base our as we like think data collection is?
No, unfortunately, Sejal, it's a good question, but let me be very honest with you. In India, we've been very proud of our statistical system, and I think rightly so. But what we are usually referring to is the union statistical system, the central statistical system. At the subnational level, there has always been a lot of tweaking of the data, because a lot of the data is used for very specific purposes. You are talking about tweaking of data now in terms of COVID reporting. But let me tell you, the most common tweaking of data happens before every finance commission award. When this finance commission gets to work, every state is playing around with its data in order to maximize the amount of funds it can get. Now, if you think about this is an incentive problem. If the respondent, which in this case, let's say is the state government, knows that you're going to use the data in a manner in which he would benefit or not benefit, then he's going to play around with the data. Be clear on this. This is going to happen. This is human behavior. The point is, do you trust it? And the answer is up to a point, yes, because there's a limit to how far that they can go. So finance commissions are perfectly aware of this problem. And what they do is they don't take that data at face value. In fact, the National Accounts Division of the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation helps them in recasting the state level estimates to give something which is more consistent. So you have to be aware that if there is an incentive incompatibility problem in data reporting, then this kind of an issue will keep arising, and you have to be prepared to deal with it.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to my colleague Charan Singh to propose vote of thanks, let me say a few things. First thing, I must say that I have spent at least 40 years in statistics, and I got new insights from the lecture or the deliberation given by Dr. Pranav Sen. So I'm sure each one of us have been benefited by your deliberation, your insights into the into today's lecture on Statistics Day. This is a wonderful and masterful exposition, and all good things come to an end, and this cannot be an exception. Let me also add, I'm sure when I was doing the MStat, I was holding the bachelor degree in statistics. So, but the things have changed. I like the way you said this, and I fully agree. Nowadays, the situation is very different. And I would request my friend Charan Singh to propose a vote of thanks and then make few announcements as usual. Over to Charan Singh.
Yeah, I really would like to thank Dr. Ashok for chairing the session and Dr. Pratap Singh to have accepted our invitation at such a short notice. He is very passionate about the subject, as has been visible to all of us. He is recovering from COVID like I am. And I know what devastating effect COVID has on you. Has not had even a sip of water during the whole discourse that he has had. Shows how passionate he is on the subject. I'm really impressed. I was part of the National Statistical Commission, which was chaired by Dr. C. Rangarajan, as I was a repository of the financial sector statistics. And I could see that because the National Statistical Commission would meet often, and I could see the gaps in statistics from various sectors that would be brought in. It's after such a long time, I think nearly a decade and a half, that I've heard Professor Sen speak about the discrepancies and deficiencies, and of course, the lack of utility of the administrative data. So much of it is generated, heaps and mountains of it, and if some interest is shown in it, it could really improve the welfare of the people in the country. I totally endorse the view which has been expressed by Dr. Sen, and the example that he gave is so apt that we could overcome the 2008 global financial crisis for two reasons. We had the Asian crisis nearby, but we have also had and collected lots of data and had rich analysis on the Great Depression. Because we knew exactly what is happening in the Great Depression, we could manage the demand, which we continue to manage even today, about 13 years after the 2008 crisis. The COVID impact, again, which we are able to handle to some extent, possibly because we have learned as an economist lessons from the Great Depression, as well as the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 and 19. So I totally endorse and agree that the distress data should be collected and analyzed because these keep happening often. And as I gave the example, it could be a COVID where the world is flattened, it could be a flood, it could be an earthquake. But the pattern is the same, and the little geographical area where it happens needs the support, and therefore this data could be very, very useful. Coming from Dr. Singh, who headed the statistical system in the country, I feel that this lecture of his will go a long way, and he would be certainly sending, as I'm requesting him to send, to the policymakers at the places today. Maybe the chief statistician of India needs to listen to this data. If we had collected the data on the migration pattern from where to where, how many, probably the welfare schemes could have been more laser beamed and far more effective. Given that the statistical system prevails, the Indian statistical officers are posted at logistic places, and therefore, coming from Dr. Singh, the data collection can always be robust, reliable, credible, and on which policy can depend. So I would really like to thank Dr. Singh, despite his ailment and recovery, and I know it in person, how difficult it is to concentrate, how impossible it is in the recovery stage in post-COVID to even write one page, and so logically and so cogently, he has articulated his thoughts and brought to us a view which I think will change the statistical system in disaster. So I really want to thank you from the depth of my heart, Dr. Singh, for putting this lecture together and sharing your thoughts with all of us.
Thank you,
I have
Charan.
I have a small announcement to make. I think Dr. Singh's National Statistical Day lecture is going to be pathbreaking. We will put the recording of this lecture by noon tomorrow on our website. I will also be mentioning about it on the Twitter, and I would like that this lecture should really be celebrated. And I would like you to join me in forwarding this lecture. It's a very short lecture, 38 minutes. Anybody can listen and it's very, very cogent. Not a single word said which was wastage of time. So absolutely solid gold, 24 karat, 38 minutes. I think we can all utilize it and improve the statistical system. Another announcement that I want to make is on Friday, we have another lecture. It is by Vikram Soni, and the topic is the green economy. I would request all of you to please join in. I do not know what the statistical system will be for green economy. I've been thinking, struggling on it for about last few years. Hardly any country has the green statistics or green national income statistics. And I think it would be really worth listening to Vikram Soni on the topic. I invite all of you from 5:30 to 6:30. We'll have a lecture on green economy. With that, once again, thanks to Dr. Singh for sparing time and being with us on the National Statistics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charan.
Thank you very much, sir.
everyone, for
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
listening in.